An important part of growing your own food is being able to preserve that food long term. So today I want to take you through 3 ways to preserve your bean harvest. And whether it's bush beans or pole beans, the process is all the same. And although the unpredictable weather did add some challenges to the garden, the various heirloom varieties I grew were just thriving. And in case you're interested, I was growing Scarlet Runners, Blue Lake, Cherokee Wax, and Rattlesnake beans this year. Now let's jump right into one of the oldest and most trusted methods of food preservation, and that's fermentation. And keeping everything simple, I'm just using freshly harvested beans, garlic, some filtered water, pickling salt, and rosemary I pulled from the garden. After a quick rinse under cold tap water, we discarded any of the beans with pest damage, trimmed the ends off, put them aside, and peeled some of our fresh garlic. We are using a scale here to make sure we get our food plus water to salt ratio absolutely right. And the first step to that is tearing away the weight of the jar. Then we added our garlic and rosemary to the bottom of the jar and began stuffing as many beans in the jar as we could. Then we put everything back on the scale, and this is with the jar weight teared away. And we can see here that we have just over 1,000 grams of beans in this jar. Then after adding enough filtered water to cover just the top of the beans, we multiplied this number by 3% to determine how much salt we needed to add. Then dumped every drop of the water in the jar into a fresh clean bowl. We then tared the scale once again and added the appropriate amount of salt. In our case, it was 101 grams to have a 3% food plus water to salt ratio. And here's the pickling salt that we're using. You want to be sure not to use regular table salt for this process. Then we began adding the salt to the water until we hit our desired number, which was 101 grams. Then using a whisk, you just want to agitate the water until all of that salt is fully dissolved. And once it is, you can just simply take that water and add it right back into the jar. And for fermentation, it's extremely important that your beans are fully submerged in the jar. So we just took a baggie, filled it with a little bit of water, just enough to get the water level in the jar right above the tops of the beans. Then we covered that with a coffee filter and stored it away in our pantry. And we'll allow these beans to ferment for 1 to 2 weeks before removing the plastic bag, adding a lid, and storing in the refrigerator. The second method I'm using this year to preserve my beans is by pickling them or canning. And again, keeping the ingredient list pretty simple, we're using beans, garlic, dill, water, and pickling salt. And as we're using significantly smaller jars, we're going to cut these beans in half as our jars and lids are sterilizing in boiling water for a minimum of 10 minutes. And I'm rotating these lids just to make sure they don't stick together during the sterilization process. Then in a separate pot, I'm adding 3 cups of pickling vinegar, 2.5 cups of water, and 1/3 of a cup of the pickling salt. Then I just stir that together and allow it to come to a boil. And now that our jars have been sterilizing for 10 minutes, we're going to carefully remove them from the pot of boiling water and transfer them to the counter on top of a towel. And now in our freshly sterilized jar, we can add our dill, garlic, and a little bit of a hot pepper if you want some spice. And you'll want to try and stuff as many beans into these jars as you possibly can. And once fully packed, you can take your brine, which is your vinegar, water, and salt mixture, and ladle it into the jars. Not crucial that it's covering the beans. In fact, you want to leave about 1/2 inch of headspace. Now you can take your sterilized lids and put them all on top of the jars. Then you can screw those down, but you don't want to screw them down too tight. Just finger tight is perfect. Now we can move these jars back into a hot water bath. The water does not need to be boiling over, but we do want to make sure that the water level is above the jars. And we just want that water bubbling a little bit, not a rapid boil. And after 10 minutes, I removed the jars from the hot water bath, put them on the counter, and after about 45 minutes or so, all of the lids sucked in, and I knew that I had a perfect seal. Now the third and final way I want to talk about preserving beans is just by blanching and freezing them, and this is a really great easy way to preserve your harvest. While you have a pot of water coming to a boil on the stove, you can simply trim your beans, and there's no real special way you have to do this. You can just trim them however you would prefer them. You can do them whole, you can have them whichever you prefer. Once your beans are all trimmed up and the water is boiling, it's a really simple process at this point. We're just going to add the beans to the boiling water, and while it's sitting in a boil, we're going to get an ice bath ready to put these in. We're going to leave them in the water for about 2 minutes. After, we're going to add them right to that ice bath and cool them right off. And because we wanted to separate our yellow beans from our green and purple, that's just our preference. We did a separate batch, but as you can see here is after the boiling process, the purple actually completely disappears, and now we're left with just straight green beans. And after those beans are fully cooled off, you can just strain them out, remove any of the ice cubes. We put them in a towel to help get some of that water off, patted that down. And once the blanched beans are fully dry, you can add them to any old regular freezer bag or a vacuum sealer like we did. Then transfer that bag into the freezer, and you'll be enjoying beans for months to come. Now, if you made it this far in the video, it would be a really big help if you like and subscribe. Now, I'm completely aware I went through a lot of this stuff relatively quickly, so if you want any deep dives into any of these food preservation methods, please let me know in the comments and I'll see what I can do for you.